A new report from the Congressional Budget Office full of bad news for Obamacare and its supporters. Most notably, it says that Obamacare will result in the loss of a whopping 2 million jobs by 2017. This is a shocking number. The question is the president going to pay attention to this key report? Joining us now to carve it up, we welcome back Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan and health policy experts Carolyn Pearson, she's Vice President at Avalere Health, and Dr. Scott Gottlieb from the American Enterprise Institute. Jim Jordan, welcome back. We appreciate it. And, you know, for, I don't know, months and months and months and months, people are saying that the burden of Obamacare, for one reason or another, is going to cost jobs, is going to stop hiring, is going to cut back on hours worked. Now the CBO recognizes it. What happens from here?
Well, the good news is we have an alternative, and Leader Cantor has pledged we're going to bring our alternative up. But I want to back up, Larry. We already knew how bad Obamacare was as far as higher premiums, higher deductibles. You can't keep your plan. You can't keep your doctor. A website that doesn't work, a website that's insecure. And now we learn, as you just said, stagnant economy going forward, more deficits, more debt. And the biggest thing that concerns me is this disincentive to work. That is exactly the wrong message we want to be sending to the American people and to our economy. But the good news is we have an alternative that we're going to be for. We're going to bring it forward, and we're going to pass it, and that's what excites me.
What can you just give us a brief, just a real brief rundown, Jim Jordan, of the alternative?
Sure. It's going to be patient-centered, family-centered, consumer-centered, like we want, not Washington-centered. It's going to allow you to purchase insurance across state lines. It's going to treat families, give them the same tax benefits we currently give companies. It's going to have some real tort reform. It's going to encourage health savings accounts, not discouraging them. Again, empowering people, empowering the patient, the doctor, and the family, not empowering Washington, which in my judgment is exactly what we need and, frankly, what the American people want us to do.
All right. Thank you for that. Carolyn Pearson, welcome back. What's your take on all this, Carolyn? I mean, I think what the Congressional Budget Office basically said today is incentives matter. And that includes work and labor incentives. As our own John Harwood laid out, I thought very nicely, basically, if it doesn't pay to work on an after-tax basis, people won't do it. If you lose your subsidy, but you get a raise and you have a higher tax rate, Carolyn, why would you do that? Now, what are they going to do to get out of this box? That's the real question.
Well, let's be clear, Larry. We never know what assumptions are going to be, least of all those coming out of the Congressional Budget Office. What they're telling us right now is that people are really going to be choosing not to work because they have an alternative. They don't have to keep working just in order to maintain that health insurance, and that's a very powerful thing. If we see people having more freedom and more flexibility and opportunities to go off and potentially start their own businesses and be able to get health insurance for themselves and their families, that's a good thing. I think the other really important point to make here is, in the context of the Republican plan, the incentive here that is driving people not to return to the labor force is the subsidies. It's the Medicaid expansion and the premium subsidies. Those premium subsidies stay intact in the Republican plan that was put forth recently. That's
true, Jim Jordan? I just want to get that straight before I bring in Scott.
Our plan is patient-centered. And I would make this point, too, Larry. The Democrats can't have it both ways. Remember, when this thing passed, they used the CBO numbers to say, oh, this is going to save taxpayers money. Now we find out it's going to cost 2.5 million jobs over 10 years, $1 trillion in new taxes, and $1.8 trillion in new spending. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, we like the CBO one time, we don't like it now. And let's remember this, too. The one thing about the CBO thing that's still in question is, what did the bailouts mean? The CBO may have gotten that one wrong as well, but that's part of this
right,
report
I'm going to get back to the bailouts in a second, but I want to bring in Dr. Scott Gottlieb. First of all, the CBO is looking at incentives. I don't think you have to be a supply-sider to understand subsidies and taxes.
Right, and they're only looking at a very narrow population. They're basically talking about people who are transitioning from being unemployed out of the labor force back into the labor force. And what they're saying is those folks are probably going to stay unemployed longer since they're going to have to forego the subsidies. So this is a very narrow slice of the population. I think these same economic principles apply to the entire workforce. People are going to be reluctant, for example, to increase their income if it means growing your income an incremental $1,000 means you're going to lose $200 or $300 in subsidies. The net effective tax rate at certain wage bands here is well more than 50%.
You know, this is like this is like the problem with anti-poverty programs.
Yeah,
it's the same thing. If you go off welfare or you go off food stamps or if you go off whatever, all of a sudden you lose the benefit, and if you make income, your marginal tax rate goes sky high.
Right.
So you have 70, 80, 100% tax rates to go to work. Right. This is the same thing, is it not?
Right, no, exactly. And it's more pronounced here because the subsidies are based on income. Carolyn's right to a point that the Republican plan has the same problem, but it's a little less pronounced there because the subsidies are tied more to age than income. So everyone's getting more of a flat subsidy. Right. But there's still the same problem in that plan.
Why is anything going to change? In other words, you get this estimate from CBO. It's a shocking estimate, if you ask me. It's 3 times the incentive effect they put. A couple years ago, they said maybe we'll lose 800,000 jobs. Now they're saying in 10 years we're going to lose 2.4 million jobs. That's a big number.
Right.
And that may be a lowball number, too, because as you say, it's a small slice. So what happens? Why doesn't anybody make any changes here?
Well, it's remarkable that the CBO couldn't arrive at this economic principle when they did their initial estimate. The Urban Institute, at the time that the plan passed, put out a study basically predicting some of this. They showed how Obamacare remade the wage-labor relationship. Again, I think this is going to go all up the income spectrum. Everyone who gets an Obamacare subsidy now has a disincentive to grow their income incrementally. If you can't blow through those income bands, then it doesn't pay to increase your income an extra $1,000. And
Carolyn, with all due respect, I still think businesses are not going to hire because of this plan. I still think the plan is so darn expensive with the hike in premiums that people are going to walk away from this plan. They dropped their estimates from 7 million to 6 million. That's a big drop. And by the way, this is an important number from the CBO study. Employment-based coverage is going to drop to the 6 or 7 million mark each year. In other words, they're going to lose a lot of people once we get these employer-based figures coming in. We haven't really seen that yet. So now, I don't want to overlook that. Lower population, less enrollment, and a lot of people are going to drop out of their employer plans, Carolyn. This, again, these are big failures of Obamacare.
Well, I agree with Scott on all of the incentives. Obviously, those are things that you face with any program that's going to be tied to subsidies for low-wage workers. The employer numbers haven't changed. The estimates have stayed stable, and I think there is reason to believe that employers are going to take a wait-and-see approach. Long-term, could we see some of the low-wage, low-margin businesses starting to drop coverage and move people into exchanges where they get subsidies? That's possible, but we certainly don't see signs of that happening in the near term, particularly with the troubled rollout that we've seen thus far.
Well, but Jim Jordan, the enrollment is way down. Now, they're saying, CBO said they're going to get to 6 million. I got to see this to believe it because we're in the we're in the early part of February. March 31st, the deadline. More or less at the beginning of January, that number 3 million was put out. We still don't know who really paid and whether that's a real number. I mean, Jim Jordan, they may wind up not getting anything close to the 6 million. The 6 million is less than the 7 million, and now it's got to deal with employer-based walkouts. So again, I ask you, when will the administration come to the table and try something different?
Yeah, I'm with you, Larry. I'll believe it when I see it. I think it's going to be significantly less. And let's just be honest. I don't think they'll see it until we pick up 6 seats in the United States Senate. And the United States Senate's in Republican hands. And there's additional pressure, additional push for the president to come to the table and say, this law's not working. It needs to be changed. It needs to be repealed. And we need to start over with something that does empower people and empower families.
Scott Cobley, I got to give you the last word. One other thing caught my eye in the reporting of this, and that is the so-called bailout, the risk corridor, is going to make money. I believe the number they used was $8 billion. Do you buy that? I thought the insurance companies were going to incur so many extra costs as a result of changing, the cancellation into the new plan. It was going to cost them money. Right,
and Carolyn's done a lot of work on this, too. Originally, the risk corridors were supposed to be revenue neutral, meaning it just shifted around money between the insurers. When the Obama administration put out the regulation, they implied that the risk corridors are no longer budget neutral, that they'll take taxpayer money and funnel it to the insurers. It depends on what you think the Obama administration is going to do. I assume CBO is making their estimate off of the statute and not off of what they did in regulation. What they did in regulation doesn't look like it's legal. It seems to conflict with the statute.
Carolyn, People are talking about a bailout, and they don't like the bailout. CBO is saying it's a bail-in. Which is it going to be?
We'll have to see. CBO is basing this on the experience we've had in the Medicare program, which suggests that, in fact, risk corridors could be revenue generating for the federal government. So that would really turn the story around, wouldn't it?
Carolyn, what do you make of the regulation? What do you think the administration is saying in that
Larry,
regulation?
when has that ever happened, though? Come on, we know it's going to be a bailout.
In the history of the planet Earth.
Common sense tells us it's going to be a bailout.
In the history of the planet Earth. All right.
Exactly.
Thanks to all of you. Dr. Scott Gottlieb, Carolyn Pearson, Congressman Jim Jordan. Appreciate it very much.